Her teachers approached her one by one, offering words of respect and encouragement. Some praised her technique, others the emotional depth of her performance. They acknowledged the dedication, practice, and quiet perseverance that had brought her to this moment. There were no excuses, no explanations, only recognition of her skill and effort. The teachers who had once smirked now looked at her with genuine admiration, understanding that talent and determination could not be ignored. Even in the quietest of students, her classmates approached as well, some nervously, others enthusiastically. They offered compliments, congratulated her, and admitted they had underestimated her. Some laughed softly at their own previous assumptions, realizing how wrong they had been. She received their words politely, humbly acknowledging the surprise and respect without arrogance or boasting. She had let her music speak, and now the words of appreciation followed naturally. Unprompted and sincere, the quiet student who had spent so many hours practicing alone, who had faced doubt and low expectations from teachers and peers alike, now found herself recognized in a way that felt both profound and genuine. She realized that her dedication and love for music had been the driving force, that the countless hours of practice, the late nights, and the focused attention on every note had led her to this moment. It was not about proving anyone wrong. It was about expressing herself fully, honestly, and beautifully. The applause, the recognition, and the admiration were simply a reflection of the authenticity she had brought to her performance. After the applause died down, the music teacher approached her with a warm smile, expressing how impressed they were and how unexpected the depth and emotion of her performance had been. The other teachers nodded in agreement, each offering brief, sincere words of respect. She listened quietly, feeling a sense of fulfillment and validation. It's not from seeking approval, but from having her dedication and talent recognized. She understood that this moment was the culmination of years of quiet effort, resilience, and love for the piano. She felt herself deeply connected to the music. Every movement of her fingers carried intention, every chord expressed feeling, and every pause held meaning. She was aware of the room, of the people in it, but not in the way of seeking approval. She felt their attention like a current in the air, guiding her, amplifying her focus, but not controlling her. She was fully present, fully immersed, letting the music guide her through each measure, each phrase, each section of the piece she had practiced so diligently. The teachers exchanged subtle glances, realizing that their assumptions had been wrong. This quiet, unassuming student had mastered a piece with skill, control, and emotion that they had not predicted. Their previous smirks had vanished entirely, replaced by thoughtful observation, as if they were silently acknowledging her talent for the first time. Some could not hide the small nods of admiration, tiny gestures that spoke volumes. They were seeing, perhaps for the first time, the depth of her dedication, the countless hours she had spent perfecting her craft, and the quiet strength that had carried her through. The students were equally mesmerized. They leaned in closer, eyes fixed on her hands as they moved over the keys with precision and grace. The music seemed to hold them, to envelop them, pulling them into the world she was creating with every note. Some felt chills, others felt a wave of calm and awe. There were no words exchanged, no need for conversation. The sound alone was enough to capture their attention completely. To silence the doubts and distractions of the day, her focus never wavered. She did not glance at the audience, did not search for reactions, and did not play with the intent of impressing anyone. Her attention was solely on the music, on expressing the story she wanted to tell, on letting the piano convey the emotions she carried within. The room fell away around her, and she became entirely absorbed in the flow of notes and the rhythm of her performance. Each measure built upon the last, rising and falling in tempo, in volume, in intensity, carrying the emotion and narrative forward without interruption. As the piece reached its more challenging sections, she felt a surge of energy. Her fingers moved with precision, guided by memory, skill, and the connection she felt to the music. There were moments where the notes demanded her full attention, yet she played with a sense of freedom and expression that made it seem effortless. The teacher's earlier skepticism had transformed into silent astonishment, and the students remained frozen in attentive admiration. The music was commanding the room. She was the voice bringing it to life. She felt every chord deeply, the resonance echoing through her body and mind. She was not simply pressing keys. She was shaping the sound, guiding it with intention and emotion. The dynamics, the tempo shifts, the delicate phrasing all were chosen with care, conveying the story she wanted to share. Every note was an extension of herself, a fragment of her personality and passion expressed without words. She could feel the audience responding, not verbally, but emotionally. Drawn in by the depth and sincerity of her performance, the teachers who had doubted her watched quietly. Their expressions softened, their minds processing the unexpected skill before them. They could not deny what they were hearing. The music was flawless, moving, and powerful, and it was impossible to look away or ignore it. Even the most skeptical among them were compelled to acknowledge her talent, to appreciate the dedication and precision that had brought this performance to life. Their previous assumptions about her abilities had been completely overturned. The students were equally affected. Some sat in wide-eyed wonder, others clasped their hands in silent admiration. The whispers and chatter that had been present moments before had disappeared entirely. The piano was speaking, telling a story that captivated every listener. She had transformed from the quiet student at the back of the classroom into the center of attention through the sheer force of her skill and emotion. Her music was commanding, drawing everyone into the world she was creating. Holding them there until the last note had been played, she felt a profound connection with everyone in the room. A silent exchange of emotion and energy. The music allowed her to communicate without words, to express everything she had kept inside for so long. It was a revelation both for her and for the audience, that a person who seemed quiet and unassuming could hold such power, such depth, such skill. The notes flowed naturally, carrying the essence of her passion and dedication to everyone listening. The room remained silent in the most profound sense. Not a whisper, not a cough, not a shift in the seat disturbed the air. All attention was on the music and on her. She continued to play, feeling the intensity and emotion build with every measure. Each phrase had meaning, each chord carried feeling, and the audience could sense it. The teachers who had once doubted her were now fully engaged, their skepticism replaced by respect and awe. The students who had whispered behind her back were now silent, listening intently. Captivated by the performance unfolding before them, she reached the final section of the piece, her fingers moving with confidence and grace. The music had built to a crescendo, each note carrying significance, each chord resonating with depth. The audience felt the tension and release, the rising and falling emotion, the story being told through sound. The teachers nodded subtly, some unable to hide the admiration on their faces. The students were mesmerized, leaning in, holding their breath as they listened to the final measures, as the last note rang out. She held it for just a moment, letting it echo and settle in the room. Then, as it faded, there was a brief pause, a silence so profound that it seemed to stretch and linger. Everyone absorbed the impact of the performance, processing what they had just witnessed. The quiet student, once underestimated and overlooked, had held the room in awe. The power of her music had transformed doubt into respect, skepticism into admiration, and casual attention into focused engagement. The silence was broken by the first applause, soft at first, then growing steadily. The teachers stood, some nodding and smiling, their respect clear without words. The students clapped enthusiastically, some whispering to each other about the skill and emotion they had just experienced. The quiet girl at the piano smiled slightly, feeling the satisfaction and pride of having expressed herself fully, of having shared her music so completely and authentically. She did not seek approval, but it was gratifying to see the acknowledgement of her effort and talent. The performance had been more than just playing the piano. It had been a statement of dedication, perseverance, and passion. She had faced the doubts and low expectations of those around her and transformed them through her music. The room, once filled with casual conversation and quiet amusement, was now a space of focused attention and emotional connection. She had let the piano speak for her, and in doing so, She had earned the respect and admiration of her audience without uttering a single word as she rose from the piano. She felt a sense of calm and accomplishment. The applause continued, but she was no longer concerned with it. She had communicated her dedication, her skill, and her passion through the music itself. The teachers who had doubted her now looked at her with newfound respect. The students who had whispered and snickered now saw her in a completely different light. She had proven, quietly and powerfully, that talent and effort could not be underestimated. Her performance had shut the room down, not through spectacle or theatrics, but through the sincerity, skill, and emotional depth of her music. As the last note faded, the room remained quiet for a moment, caught in the resonance of her music. Then, slowly, the applause began. It started softly, hesitant, as if people were still processing what had just happened. And then it grew louder, stronger, unstoppable. The teachers stood, clapping and nodding in appreciation, their previous doubts and smirks replaced with admiration. Some whispered to each other, expressing amazement, while others simply watched her, silent, acknowledging the skill and emotion she had shared. It was a recognition she had not demanded, but had earned naturally, powerfully, and without words. The students were equally affected. They clapped, some cheering quietly, some whispering compliments to their friends. Their faces showed surprise, respect, and a hint of awe. They had underestimated her, assumed she would fail. But now they saw the depth of her talent, the effort she had invested, and the beauty of her performance. She had captured their attention, their emotions, and their respect with something much more profound than a showy display. It was the music itself, honest, skillful, and full of feeling, that had earned their recognition. She rose from the piano bench slowly, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and quiet joy. Her fingers tingled from the intensity of her performance, and her heart raced with excitement and satisfaction. She had faced doubt, low expectations, and silent mockery, and she had transformed it all through the power of her music. She had not sought revenge, applause, or validation. She had simply shared her talent, and in doing so, she had made herself known to the world around her. When the room was nearly full, she could feel the tension rising. The teachers had taken their seats at the front, still exchanging occasional glances and soft smirks. She sensed their doubt, but didn't let it affect her. Her heart beat a little faster, but it was a good kind of nervousness. The kind that sharpened her focus and made her fingers more responsive. She ran through the first few notes silently in her mind, picturing the flow, the pauses, the crescendos, the softer moments that conveyed the emotion behind the music. The teacher in charge of the performance gave a brief introduction, explaining the event and reminding everyone to be respectful during each performance. The atmosphere was casual, but she could feel the eyes on her as she approached the piano. Some students whispered, some stared with mild curiosity, and a few teachers looked skeptical. The room seemed to hold its collective breath as she took her seat, adjusted the bench, and set her hands on the keys. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the silence fill her senses. The first note she played was soft, deliberate, and full of intention. It echoed through the room, and she could feel a subtle shift in the energy around her. The teacher's smirks faltered slightly, replaced by a flicker of curiosity. Some students stopped talking, their attention drawn by the sound. The piano notes flowed, controlled yet expressive, carrying the music she had practiced tirelessly into the room. Each chord, each phrase, seemed to ripple through the air, and she could sense the growing focus of her audience. As she continued playing, she became more immersed in the music. Her fingers moved confidently, guided by hours of practice and deep familiarity with the piece. The notes sang through the room, capturing attention and drawing listeners in. The teachers, who had expected an awkward or timid performance, now leaned forward slightly, their curiosity piqued. The students, who had whispered and laughed moments earlier, became silent, mesmerized by the clarity and emotion of her playing. She felt the connection with the audience growing. The music was no longer just notes. It was a conversation, a story, an expression of everything she felt but couldn't always say. Each phrase carried meaning. Each chord revealed emotion. The room was slowly transforming from a casual, skeptical gathering into a space where the music demanded attention. Even those who had doubted her could not turn away from the sound that filled the room. Her focus never wavered. She didn't look at the audience, didn't seek approval, didn't even think about their reactions. She was entirely present in the music, letting it guide her fingers and shape her expression. The tempo, the dynamics, the phrasing, all of it came naturally, as if the piano itself were alive and speaking through her. She could feel the depth of each note, the resonance, the way it touched the room, and it filled her with quiet satisfaction. The teachers who had doubted her now exchanged subtle glances, their smirks replaced by thoughtful expressions. Some shifted in their seats, trying to take in every note, every nuance. They had expected something small, unremarkable, but what they heard was precise, emotional, and commanding. The whispers and jokes that had floated through the hallways now seemed distant, irrelevant. She was proving, silently and powerfully, that her dedication and talent could not be ignored. The students, too, were caught up in the performance. Some sat wide-eyed, some leaned forward, and some simply listened, unsure how to express their surprise. They had never imagined that the quiet student at the back of the classroom could produce such music. The contrast between her usual silence and the commanding presence of her performance was striking. It was a lesson in focus, preparation, and the power of passion. The music spoke for her in ways words never could. Her body moved naturally with the flow of the music. Her fingers glided over the keys, her wrists relaxed, her posture balanced. She played with expression, allowing subtle variations in tempo and volume to convey the story she wanted to tell. The room felt suspended in time, filled with the vibrations of the piano and the emotion it carried. She could sense the shift in the atmosphere, the way attention had shifted from doubt to fascination, from casual observation to deep listening. The performance was not about proving the teachers wrong or seeking applause. It was about expressing herself fully and honestly, about letting the music convey what she could not say. Yet as she played, she could feel the respect building in the room. Each note, each chord, each pause contributed to an unspoken recognition of her skill and dedication. The teachers who had doubted her now listened with a mixture of admiration and astonishment. The students, too, realized that they had underestimated her. She was aware of the audience only in the sense of feeling their focus and energy, not in the sense of seeking approval. She was present in the music, in the rhythm, in the emotion. The room became a space where the music was the only language, and everyone in it became part of the conversation. She could feel the tension in her body ease as she continued, the nervousness transforming into confidence, the fear into pure expression. The piano was her voice. She let it speak freely. By the time she reached the more complex sections of the piece, the audience was fully engaged. The teacher's earlier smirks had completely vanished, replaced by attentive expressions. The students were silent, some holding their breath, captivated by the skill and emotion on display. Each note seemed to draw them further into the story she was telling, a story of perseverance, passion, and quiet strength. The room had transformed from a space of skepticism into a space of shared experience. Connected by the music she created, as she approached the final notes, she felt a sense of calm and satisfaction. The piece had flowed as she had imagined, each section connecting smoothly to the next. Her fingers moved naturally, her emotions guided the tempo and phrasing, and the music conveyed everything she intended. She took a deep breath as the last chord resonated, holding it just long enough for the sound to fill the room completely. Then, with a gentle release, the note faded, leaving silence behind. For a moment, there was no sound, no movement, only the lingering resonance of the piano. The room was suspended in that silence, the impact of the performance settling in. The teacher sat quietly, processing what they had just heard. The students remained still, absorbing the unexpected depth of the music. It was a moment of realization, a recognition of talent and dedication that had been hidden behind quiet appearances and understated behavior. When the first applause broke the silence, it started softly, hesitant at first, but quickly grew into a more confident and enthusiastic response. The teachers joined in, some standing, some nodding quietly in acknowledgement. The students clapped, some smiling in surprise, some whispering compliments to one another. She sat back for a moment, letting the applause wash over her, feeling a sense of quiet pride and satisfaction. It wasn't about the recognition. It was about knowing she had given everything she had, expressed herself fully, and shared the music she loved. The performance had begun as a quiet hope, a private challenge, and it had grown into a powerful moment of expression and connection. She had faced the doubts and expectations of others and transformed them through her music. The teachers who had smirked now understood, at least in part, the depth of her dedication and the strength of her talent. The students had learned that quietness does not mean lack of ability, that patience, practice, and passion can produce results that surprise and inspire. As she stood and walked away from the piano, she felt a mixture of relief, pride, and anticipation for what might come next. She had not sought approval. She had earned it in the most authentic way possible, through her dedication, her talent, and her willingness to express herself fully. The room, once filled with doubt and casual amusement, was now a space of respect and recognition. And she had done it not through words, not through boasting or confrontation, but simply by letting as she continued to play. The room seemed to hold its breath. The notes from the piano filled every corner, weaving through the air with a presence that could not be ignored. The teachers, who had arrived with smirks and quiet amusement, now leaned forward slightly, their expressions shifting from doubt to curiosity, then to awe. They had expected a timid, unremarkable performance, but what they were hearing was confident, precise, and full of emotion. The music carried a story, a depth they had not anticipated, and it held them in a suspended moment of attention. The students were just as captivated. They had come expecting another routine performance, perhaps something mediocre. But now they were silent, eyes wide, leaning forward, caught by the grace and power of the music. The casual chatter and whispering that had floated through the room just moments ago had disappeared entirely. There was no need for words. The piano was speaking and everyone was listening. The notes seemed to fill not just the room, but the space around it, resonating in hearts and minds with a force that surprised them all. Her afternoons became dedicated to practicing. The moment she returned home, she would set her bag down and head straight to the piano. The house was quiet, with only the hum of the heater and the occasional creak of the floorboards to accompany her. She warmed up with scales, then played simpler pieces to settle her mind. After that, she focused on the piece she would perform. Each note had to be perfect. Each phrase had to convey the emotion she felt inside. Sometimes she would stop and replay sections over and over until they sounded exactly right. It was hard work, but it was the kind of work that didn't feel like a burden because she loved it. Her family noticed her dedication but didn't push her. They understood her quiet passion and knew she needed space to explore it. Sometimes her grandmother would come into the room and watch, sitting silently in a chair nearby, her eyes full of pride. Other times her younger sibling would peek around the door, curious but too shy to interrupt. She didn't mind. The piano was her private world, a place where she could express herself freely and fully, despite her growing excitement. A thread of nervousness ran through her. What if she made a mistake during the performance? What if the teacher's smirks returned? Or worse, if the audience laughed? She tried not to dwell on those thoughts, but they crept in sometimes when she was practicing alone. Each time she would remind herself that her music was her own, that she had put in the hours and the effort, and that mistakes were just part of learning. She tried to turn those worries into motivation, using them to focus more deeply, to play more carefully, to listen more closely to every note. At school, the whispers continued. Some students would mutter under their breath, guessing how she would perform. Some teachers mentioned her in passing, their tones slightly amused or skeptical. She walked past them without looking back. She didn't need their opinions to define her abilities. She kept her head down, her eyes forward, and her mind on the piano, in music class. The teacher began giving small assignments to prepare for the performance. They asked students to bring ideas for pieces, to think about how they would practice, and to reflect on what they wanted to communicate through their music. She wrote detailed notes, planning her practice schedule and analyzing the piece she wanted to perform. She thought about the tempo, the dynamics, the phrasing, and the feeling behind each section. She imagined how she wanted the room to respond, how she wanted the music to reach people, even if they weren't listening closely. Each evening, she would practice for hours. Sometimes her fingers ached, and sometimes her mind felt tired, but she pushed through it. She practiced slowly at first, breaking the piece into sections. She worked on the difficult parts until they became easier. She played with expression, letting her emotions shape the music. Sometimes she recorded herself to listen back, noticing small mistakes or areas where she could improve. It was tedious work, but she loved the process. Every hour she spent at the piano brought her closer to her goal. One day, she accidentally played a section perfectly without thinking, her fingers moving effortlessly over the keys. She paused, surprised at her own progress. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel proud. This was the result of countless hours of practice, patience, and perseverance. She realized she had improved more than she had thought. The music began to flow naturally, not just technically correct, but filled with feeling. She smiled to herself, imagining how it would feel to play in front of others, to share the music she had poured so much into. She also began to notice small details in her surroundings while practicing. The way sunlight fell across the piano keys in the morning, the sound of the wind brushing against the window, the quiet hum of life in the house. She realized that these small moments could influence how she played, that the world around her could shape her music. She began to experiment, playing with tempo and volume to match the feeling of the day, letting her surroundings seep into her performance. Her connection to the music deepened, and with it, her confidence grew at school. A few classmates tried to get her to talk about the performance, but she remained reserved. She didn't want to boast or draw attention to herself before the day arrived. She simply nodded, smiled politely, and continued with her day. She could hear the speculation and quiet mockery, but it didn't affect her. She knew that her music would speak for her, and that was all that mattered. The anticipation built inside her, a mix of excitement and tension, and she focused on channeling that energy into her practice. The day before the performance, she stayed late at the school music room to rehearse on the grand piano. It was different from her home piano, larger and more resonant. She spent hours adjusting to the keys, listening to how the notes rang in the bigger space, learning how to use the instrument to express her emotions more fully. Each chord seemed to have more depth. Each note carried more weight. She closed her eyes and imagined the performance the next day, picturing the teachers' faces, the audience's reactions, and the feeling of completing her piece flawlessly. Her heart raced with anticipation, but she felt ready. That night, she couldn't sleep well. Her mind kept going over the music, imagining every moment of the performance, anticipating every possible mistake, and thinking about how to correct it. She practiced once more in her room, playing softly so as not to disturb anyone. Each note resonated within her, reinforcing her confidence and determination. She reminded herself that no matter what happened, she had worked hard, she had practiced diligently, and she had something valuable to share. The morning of the performance arrived. She woke early, her stomach fluttering with nerves and excitement. She went through her usual routine, trying to calm herself while allowing the anticipation to fuel her focus. She packed her bag, double-checked her music sheets, and took a deep breath. She imagined stepping into the music room, sitting at the piano, and letting the music take over. She felt a mix of fear and exhilaration, but she also felt prepared. At school, the hallways were bustling with students, some excited about their own performances, others simply passing the time. She moved quietly through the crowd, her steps measured and calm. When she arrived at the music room, she saw the teachers sitting at the front, some exchanging glances and smirks. A few students whispered behind her back. She noticed them all, but didn't let it affect her. She walked to the piano, placed her music sheets carefully on the stand, and sat down. She took a deep breath, letting the weight of the moment settle, and focused on the music. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, recalling every practice session, every late night, every challenge she had overcome. She felt the hours of preparation flow through her fingers. The anticipation, the doubts, and the whispers faded as her hands touched the keys. The first note rang out, soft and controlled, filling the room with sound. The teacher's smirks faltered, and the students went quiet. For the first time, she felt the possibility of changing everyone's perception with just the music she had poured her heart into. She let herself play, confident, determined, and completely immersed in the performance. That had begun as a quiet hope and had grown into a powerful moment of self-expression. The morning of the performance was filled with a strange mix of excitement and nervous tension. She arrived at the music room early, wanting to be alone with the piano for a few minutes before anyone else came in. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and music sheets. The light from the windows streamed across the floor, highlighting the grand piano at the center. She walked slowly toward it, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. It was quiet, almost serene, but she knew the room would soon fill with voices, whispers, and expectations. She placed her music sheets carefully on the stand and sat down on the bench. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment, feeling the smooth surface beneath her touch. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, letting her mind replay every practice session, every late night, every hour she had devoted to perfecting this piece. It wasn't just about the performance. It was about showing herself what she could do, about proving to herself that all her effort had meaning. She reminded herself that the music would guide her, that her fingers would know what to do, and that she just needed to let the piano speak. The first few students arrived, chatting quietly, some curious about her performance, some indifferent. A few teachers walked in, glancing at her and exchanging small smirks, clearly amused at the idea of the quiet student performing. They whispered to one another, making casual jokes about what they expected. She noticed them, but didn't react. She was focused on the piano, on the music that had carried her through countless hours of practice. Their expressions, their words, their doubt, they were irrelevant. The music was what mattered. Other students began trickling in, some taking seats at the back, some lingering near the door. There was a mixture of curiosity, boredom, and casual conversation. A few whispered, guessing how she would perform, making jokes they thought she couldn't hear. She ignored them, letting the ambient sounds of the room fade into the background. She concentrated on her breathing, her fingers, and the mental image of the performance unfolding perfectly. She walked into the classroom, as quietly as she always did. Her backpack was slung over one shoulder, her books neatly stacked inside. She didn't talk much during lessons, and when she did, it was soft and thoughtful, not loud or attention-seeking. Teachers often didn't notice her, except to mark attendance or give instructions. Some of her classmates whispered that she was shy or even boring, but she didn't mind. She preferred it that way. There was a kind of comfort in being invisible, in moving through the day without anyone really expecting much from her. Music was her escape. She had a small keyboard at home and a piano at her grandmother's house. She would spend hours practicing, learning pieces by ear, trying to get every note just right. Nobody at school knew how good she was, and she liked it that way. She didn't practice to impress anyone. She practiced because the music felt like a part of her. When she pressed her fingers against the keys, it was like talking without words. The notes carried her feelings, her thoughts, her dreams. Sometimes she imagined the music reaching other people, touching them, even if she never played for anyone. Her teachers didn't see that side of her. They saw a quiet student, someone who didn't ask questions and didn't participate in class discussions. They assumed she was average, maybe a little timid, and certainly not the type who would stand out. They smirked sometimes when she answered incorrectly or hesitated to speak. It wasn't mean-spirited, just dismissive. They didn't pay much attention to her because they didn't think there was anything noteworthy to notice. Her classmates, too, didn't know the truth. They didn't know that she could play complicated pieces by memory, that she could make the piano sing in ways that brought tears to her grandmother's eyes. They didn't know that she spent long nights practicing while the house slept, her fingers moving over the keys like they belonged there. They didn't know that the music she created was full of life, full of emotion, full of everything she couldn't say out loud in class. She liked being alone with her music. In the quiet of her room, she could make mistakes and try again, learn something new, or just let the notes flow freely. Music didn't judge her or smirk at her mistakes. Music didn't doubt her abilities or laugh behind her back. Music simply accepted her, and she felt safe there. Sometimes she would close her eyes and imagine playing in front of a large audience. Not for applause, but to share the music itself. The thought excited her and terrified her at the same time. At school, she moved through the day as usual. She took her seat at the back of the classroom and pulled out her notebook. Teachers gave instructions, expecting little from her, and she followed along quietly. She answered questions softly, just enough to be noticed, but never loudly enough to attract attention. Other students spoke over her, laughed with friends, or shared stories, and she watched from the sidelines, content to listen. One day, the music teacher asked the class if anyone wanted to participate in a small performance event. Her heart skipped a beat. This was her chance to play, even if only for a few minutes. She raised her hand tentatively. A few students snickered, whispering that she wouldn't be good enough. A teacher raised an eyebrow and smirked, thinking it would be amusing to see her attempt it. Nobody expected her to succeed. They assumed she was making a mistake, that she didn't realize how high the standards were. She didn't pay attention to their reactions. She focused on the possibility of playing, of letting the music speak. She signed up quietly, without a word, without boasting or asking for approval. She knew she would have to practice more, prepare herself, and face the doubts of those around her. But she was ready. She had spent years developing her skills in secret, building her confidence in the solitude of her room and at her grandmother's piano. The days leading up to the performance were filled with practice. She spent long hours after school and late into the night working on her piece. Each note had to be perfect, each rhythm precise. She focused on the flow of the music, the dynamics, the emotion behind every chord. She imagined herself playing confidently, letting the music take over her fingers and her heart. She could feel the tension in her shoulders ease as she played, the world outside her room fading into the background. Music was her sanctuary, her refuge, and her voice. At school, life went on as usual. Teachers didn't mention the upcoming performance much, and most students didn't seem to care. Some whispered jokes about the quiet girl who thought she could play piano. They laughed behind her back, assuming it would be entertaining to watch her fail. She overheard some of the whispers, but didn't react. She didn't need their approval, and she didn't need their recognition. She had her music, and that was enough. Her friends, a small group who knew her better than most, offered quiet encouragement. They didn't understand the depth of her talent, but they believed in her dedication and her passion. They reminded her to practice, offered moral support, and cheered for her quietly. Their support was gentle but meaningful. It reminded her that she wasn't completely alone, that someone saw her efforts, even if the rest of the world didn't. The night before the performance, she practiced until her fingers ached. She played the piece over and over, each time listening carefully to the nuances, the tone, the emotion. She adjusted small details, refined the transitions, and focused on conveying the story behind the music. Her family listened quietly from another room, proud but not wanting to interrupt her focus. She felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The thought of playing in front of teachers who doubted her made her heart race, but it also fueled her determination. She wanted to show them what she could do, not out of spite, but to express herself fully and honestly. Morning came, and the performance day began. She got ready slowly, taking a moment to breathe and center herself. She reminded herself that the music was the most important thing, that her performance was for the music itself. She packed her bag, took a deep breath, and walked to school. The hallways were noisy with chatter, laughter, and the usual morning chaos. She moved through it calmly. Her mind focused on the piano and the piece she would play. When she arrived at the music room, teachers were already there. Some glanced at her and smirked, clearly amused at the idea that she could play well. Some whispered to each other, expecting a small, timid performance. She noticed their expressions, but didn't let them affect her. She walked to the piano, set down her music sheets, and sat on the bench. She took a deep breath, placed her fingers on the keys, and closed her eyes for a moment. She remembered every hour she had spent practicing, every late night, every mistake she had corrected, every moment she had felt connected to the music. She remembered the feeling of the keys under her fingers, the sound of the piano filling the room at her grandmother's house, the quiet satisfaction of mastering a difficult passage. All of that preparation, all of that dedication, was about to be shared in this moment. The room felt heavy with doubt and expectation. The smirks of the teachers, the whispers of the students, the quiet skepticism, it all surrounded her. But she felt calm. She let the music take over, let her fingers move naturally, let her heart guide her hands. The first notes rang out, soft but confident, clear and precise. The room seemed to shift slightly. Some students stopped talking. Some teachers leaned forward, curious despite themselves. The quiet girl who had been overlooked was now commanding attention without even trying. She played with emotion, letting the music flow through her. Each note carried meaning, each chord told a story. She felt herself connecting to everyone in the room, even those who had doubted her. The music spoke for her, expressing feelings she could never put into words. She didn't rush, didn't hesitate. She simply let the piano speak, and in doing so, she began to earn the attention and respect of those who had never taken her seriously. For the first time, the quiet student felt truly seen, not by words, but by the sound of her music filling the room. She realized that she didn't need approval to validate her talent. She didn't need anyone to believe in her until they heard her play. The music was enough, and in that moment, as her fingers moved over the keys, she felt a sense of freedom and pride she had never experienced before. She was no longer invisible, not because anyone had recognized her, but because her music had made her visible to herself. She had found her voice in the piano, and nothing else mattered. After she signed up for the performance, a mixture of excitement and nervousness settled in her chest. She went through her day as usual, attending classes, taking notes, and moving quietly through the hallways. But now, in the back of her mind, she kept thinking about the piano, about the piece she wanted to play, and about the upcoming performance. She could hear the faint whispers and soft snickers from a few students who had noticed her signing up. Some thought it would be entertaining to watch her fail. Even a few teachers exchanged knowing glances, assuming she wouldn't be able to meet the standards required for a school performance. She felt the weight of their expectations, or, more accurately, the lack of them, but she didn't let it stop her.